Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize how strong you really are. That night, I lost the last bit of myself I'd been holding on to. We were at a dinner party, Mark's coworkers and their wives. The kind of gathering where the women talk about kitchen renovations and the men talk about golf and stocks. I sat quietly at the end of the table, tracing the rim of my glass, trying to look interested. Then it happened. Mark laughed, that loud, attention-seeking laugh, and said, "You know what's funny? My wife's been talking about going on a solo trip. Can you imagine?" Everyone turned to me. He smirked, as if she could handle a week alone without getting lost or panicking. The table erupted in laughter. Even his boss chuckled. My face burned. I felt every pair of eyes slicing into me like invisible knives. I forced a small smile, the kind you make when you're trying not to cry. He leaned back, satisfied, and poured himself more wine. That moment, that single cruel moment, replayed in my head all night. When we got home, he didn't even notice I hadn't spoken for hours. He kicked off his shoes, turned on the TV, and asked if I could grab him a beer. I stood there, staring at the back of his head. The man I once believed was my partner now felt like a stranger who had taken over my life. I used to love traveling. Before Mark, I had a map pinned above my bed, little red dots marking all the places I dreamed of visiting. The Grand Canyon, Portland, maybe Italy one day. After we got married, the map came down. He said it made the room look immature. So did my paintings, my bright clothes, my loud music. Piece by piece, I disappeared, until I was small enough to fit inside his shadow. But that dinner humiliated me in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about how little he thought of me, how little I thought of myself after years of shrinking to keep the peace. Later that night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was a voice, small but steady. "You can't live like this anymore." I got up quietly, walked into the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was tired, but she was still there. Beneath the wrinkles and the dull eyes, there was a spark. I touched my cheek, whispered to my reflection. I used to be brave, and for the first time in years, I believed I could be again. People think control starts with shouting, but with Mark, it started with charm. When we first met, he made me feel protected. He'd open every door, insist on paying, say things like, "You don't need to worry about anything, I've got you." It sounded like love. But over time, "I've got you" turned into "you don't need to do that." Then "you can't handle that." And eventually, "You're not going anywhere without me." It's funny how slowly you lose yourself. So slowly that you don't notice until you're gone. He'd comment on what I wore. "Those jeans are too tight. That dress is a little desperate for attention, don't you think?" At first, I changed outfits to avoid conflict. Then I stopped buying new clothes altogether. He didn't like my friends, said they were bad influences. So I stopped seeing them. He wanted me to quit my part-time job, said it was too stressful, and didn't pay enough to be worth it. So I did. He took over the finances, every bill, every account, every decision. He said it made life easier. And I believed him. Looking back now, I realize how carefully he built that cage. Not out of locks or chains, but out of little daily comments that made me feel smaller, less capable, less me. The humiliation at that dinner wasn't the first one. It was just the loudest. There were hundreds of smaller ones, like when he'd correct me in front of strangers, or roll his eyes when I mispronounced something, or mock the way I drove, saying, "You panic every time there's traffic." Sometimes I'd fight back. I'd say, "I'm not helpless, Mark." He'd laugh, pull me close, and whisper, "Of course you're not, baby. You just need me more than you think." And somehow, I'd end up apologizing. That's how control works. It convinces you that survival means submission. But after that dinner, something inside me started to wake up. At first, I didn't even recognize it. I just felt restless. I started keeping a journal again, the kind I used to write in during college. I hid it in the bottom drawer under old sweaters he never touched. Every night, after he fell asleep, I'd write what I couldn't say out loud. Little truths like, "I miss the sound of my own voice. I want to see the ocean again. I don't want to be afraid anymore." And one night, I wrote something different. Something that scared me and thrilled me all at once. I deserved to be free. That's when I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. I didn't know for what, or how, or when, but I knew the woman who once believed in herself wasn't completely gone. She was just waiting for me to open the door. I used to think the worst pain came from being insulted. But I was wrong. The worst pain comes from realizing you've been lied to, while you were busy defending the liar. It happened on a Thursday night. Mark was working late again. He'd been doing that a lot. Big project, he said. I believed him. Because that's what I did best. I believed him. But that evening, I was cleaning his office. The room smelled like his cologne. That sharp, expensive scent he wore to feel important. I was dusting his desk when I noticed his laptop still open. A message pinged. Curiosity isn't what made me look, instinct did. The kind you develop when you've been gaslighted long enough to question your own reality. The message read, "You make staying late worth it, winking face. My stomach dropped. It was from a woman named Lauren, his coworker. The one he always said was like a sister. I scrolled up. Hundreds of messages. Flirty, intimate, weeks of conversations. Pictures. Plans. Lies wrapped in charm. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, staring at the screen, hearing my pulse in my ears. When he came home later, I was sitting at the kitchen table. His laptop in front of me. My hands shaking. He froze. Why are you on my computer? I said quietly, who's Lauren? He laughed, that fake, dismissive laugh I'd learned to hate. Oh God, are we really doing this? She's just a coworker. You're being paranoid again. Paranoid. That word had become his weapon of choice. She called you baby, Mark. He sighed dramatically, rubbed his forehead. You always twist things. You see what you want to see. No wonder I don't tell you things. You can't handle them. And there it was, the perfect reversal. He was the one lying, but I was the one to blame. I remember whispering, "You made me doubt myself for years." He shrugged. Maybe you should have trusted me more. Then he walked away. Just like that. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor, hugging my knees to my chest. But the tears that came weren't weak. They were furious. Every sob was a truth surfacing, truths I had buried under fear, guilt, and denial. I thought about all the times I apologized for things I didn't do. All the times I tried harder to please a man who never intended to be pleased. And for the first time, I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to talk it out. I didn't want to hear another excuse. I wanted out. When the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and whispered, "You're not crazy. You're done." It was the first time I'd ever spoken to myself with that kind of certainty. And I meant it. The morning after the betrayal, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The kitchen was still spotless. His mug still sat by the coffee maker. The sound of the garage door still rumbled as he left for work. But the air in that house had changed. So had I. For years, I had been careful. Careful with my words, my tone, my steps. That morning, I stopped being careful. I sat at the table with my journal, pen shaking in my hand, and wrote one word in capital letters. Enough. Then I started a list. Call lawyer. Check personal credit score. Open separate bank account. Gather documents. Find apartment listings. They were small, practical things, but every bullet point felt like a heartbeat. At noon, I drove to the credit union 2 towns over. Opened an account in my own name. The clerk smiled politely and said, "Joint or individual?" I said, "Just mine." And for a second, I felt lighter. Later that week, I called an old friend, Clara, a woman I hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years because Mark never liked her. She was a paralegal at a family law firm. When she answered, I almost hung up. I was afraid she'd judge me for disappearing all those years ago. But she didn't. "Hey," she said softly. "You sound tired." I told her everything. The control. The humiliation. The affair. When I finished, there was silence. Then she said, "You're not alone. And you're not crazy." Those words broke me open. Because for years, I'd been treated like I was both. She gave me the number of a divorce attorney she trusted, Amanda Hayes, Family Law, downtown Seattle. I wrote it down in my journal and underlined it twice. That night, I told Mark I wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. He didn't notice. He was on his phone, probably texting her. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its slow, steady spin. I realized something. The fear that used to keep me frozen wasn't working anymore. It was still there, yes, but it didn't control me. The next morning, I packed a small duffel bag and left it in the trunk of my car. Just in case. Insurance papers, passport, some cash, and my mother's wedding ring. It was the first time I'd prepared for freedom like it was a plan, not a fantasy. A few days later, I called Amanda's office. She sounded calm, professional, kind. She didn't rush me. She just listened. Then she said, "We can take this one step at a time. You've already done the hardest part, deciding." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time in silence. No music, no TV, no noise, just me in my car breathing. I wasn't brave yet, but I was awake. And that was enough for now. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same tired woman looked back, but there was something new in her eyes. A flicker. A decision. I touched the glass and whispered, "You're not done. You're just getting started. Freedom doesn't begin the day you leave. It begins the day you start preparing to." That realization became my quiet fuel. From the outside, nothing had changed. I still cooked dinner. Still smiled politely when Mark talked over me. Still said, "Good night, honey," before turning off the light. But inside, I was mapping every exit. I started with paperwork. Marriage certificate, property deed, bank statements, his pay stubs, all scanned and uploaded to a hidden cloud folder labeled Tax Records 2018. I even photographed the messages from his affair. Evidence. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Every afternoon, while he was at work, I'd visit a small coffee shop downtown. I'd sit in the corner with my laptop, pretending to browse Pinterest, while really reading divorce articles and rental listings. It was a slow, deliberate kind of freedom, the kind that grows in silence. A week later, I met Amanda, the attorney Clara had recommended. Her office was simple, sunlit, with framed degrees and a pot of orchids by the window. She greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't look away. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "You're dealing with coercive control, not just infidelity. You've been isolated emotionally and financially. That matters in court." Hearing someone name it felt like being pulled from underwater. For the first time, someone wasn't minimizing it. She walked me through options: property division, restraining orders if needed, temporary support. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You don't need to be fearless. You just need to move, even while afraid." After that meeting, I sat in my car for a long time. Hands on the steering wheel, staring at the city skyline. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt ready. That night, I created an email address he didn't know about. Used it to contact landlords and transfer digital copies of my documents. The next day, I bought a prepaid phone, my lifeline, just in case. I started taking longer walks after dinner, really short drives to nearby neighborhoods where I'd park and imagine living there. Just breathing, just existing, without being watched or corrected. Then, one Friday morning, I booked something small but symbolic, an Airbnb 2 towns away, just for 2 nights. It was listed as a writer's retreat cabin. Wooden porch, small kitchen, no Wi-Fi. Mark thought I was going to visit Clara. I didn't correct him. When I arrived, the silence felt almost holy. The first night, I made tea and sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The air smelled like pine and rain. I listened to the crickets and realized this was the first time in years I'd felt peace without permission. I didn't even check my phone. I just existed. On the second day, I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a decade, I saw the woman I used to be. Not someone's wife. Not someone's burden. Just me. Before I left, I promised myself something. When I came back, it wouldn't be to stay. It would be to finish what I'd started. I came home from that cabin different. Calmer. Sharper. Like someone who had been asleep for years and suddenly remembered who she was. Mark noticed immediately. "Where's the smile?" he asked when I walked through the door. "You always come back softer after seeing your friends." I didn't answer. I just unpacked my bag in silence. That night, he asked if I'd cooked dinner. I said, no. I wasn't hungry. He frowned, the kind of frown that meant he didn't know how to control the moment. He poured himself a drink, sat down across from me, and said, "You've been acting strange lately. Secretive." I looked him straight in the eye. "I know about Lauren." His hand froze on the glass. For a second, he said nothing. Then he leaned back, smiling like I was a child who'd said something silly. "You're still on that? God, you really can't let anything go." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said, "I've spoken to a lawyer." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. He laughed, but it didn't sound real. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't survive a week on your own." I stood up. "You've been saying that for years. Maybe it's time to find out." He slammed his hand on the table. "You're throwing everything away because you're emotional. You'll regret this." His words didn't pierce me this time. They floated past me like echoes in a place I'd already left. I already regret staying this long, I said quietly. He followed me to the bedroom, still talking, fast, desperate, manipulative. He said I was ruining his life, embarrassing him, misunderstanding everything. When none of that worked, he switched to pity. You know I didn't mean to hurt you. We can fix this. We're stronger together. I zipped my suitcase. The sound of the zipper cut through his pleading like a knife. He tried to block the doorway. Where will you even go? I met his eyes. Somewhere you're not. Then I walked past him. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. He shouted something behind me, maybe a threat, maybe a plea, but I didn't turn around. When I reached the car, my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Then I turned the key. The sound of the engine starting was the most beautiful noise I'd ever heard. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not once. I checked into a small apartment that same night, one of the listings I'd saved weeks earlier. The walls were bare, the air smelled like paint, and the mattress was thin. But it was mine. No yelling. No judgment. No control. Just silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. I lay on that mattress and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in forever, I felt safe. I whispered, "You did it." And for once, I believed myself. Freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence, heavy at first, then holy. The first few weeks alone were messy. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., thinking I heard his footsteps. I'd reach for my phone, half expecting a text from him, an apology, a threat, something. But the screen stayed blank. The quiet felt too big, too empty. Until one morning, I woke up, opened the curtains, and saw sunlight spilling across the floor. And I thought, this silence is mine. I started small, making coffee the way I liked it, strong and a little burnt. Leaving dishes in the sink overnight. Playing music loud enough that the neighbors could hear. Every tiny rebellion became a kind of freedom. Then one Saturday, I remembered the dream he used to mock, traveling alone. I opened my laptop, typed best solo trips in the US, and just stared at the screen. For a second, fear tried to crawl back in. Then I booked a train ticket to Santa Fe. No plan. No permission. Just me. The first night there, I sat in a small restaurant, alone at a corner table. The waiter asked, "Waiting for someone?" I smiled and said, "No. It's just me." He nodded. "Good for you." Something in those 3 words broke me open. I almost cried into my soup. The next morning, I walked through the desert trails, red dust on my shoes, wind in my hair. Every mile felt like shedding another layer of who I used to be. After Santa Fe came Savannah. Then Sedona. Then Portland. I stayed in cheap motels, local bed and breakfasts, cabins with creaky floors. I talked to strangers, wrote in my journal, took photos of places I used to think I'd never see. And every time I crossed a state line, I whispered the same thing under my breath. He said I couldn't do this. But I'm doing it. I started painting again, too. Little watercolor sketches of mountains and train stations, coffee cups and sunrises. I wasn't painting to prove anything, just to feel alive. Months passed, and I realized something simple but profound. The trips weren't about running away from my past. They were about returning to myself. One evening in Sedona, I watched the sunset turn the rocks gold. A group of tourists laughed nearby, but I felt alone in the best way, not lonely, just whole. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who flinched at every raised voice, who apologized for everything, who believed her dreams were silly. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, "You're stronger than you think. You always were." That night, as I packed my suitcase, I found my old wedding ring in the side pocket, the one I thought I'd thrown away. I looked at it for a long time, then set it down on a rock outside the cabin. The wind picked up and I whispered, "You can stay here. I'm moving on." And I did. It's been almost a year now. I'm sitting in a small cafe in Portland, the kind of place with chipped mugs, jazz in the background, and plants hanging from the ceiling. The morning light hits my notebook, and I smile at how full it's become. Pages of thoughts, sketches, receipts taped in from places I've been. A diary of rebirth. These days, I don't think about Mark much. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've reclaimed all the space he used to take up. He tried reaching out once early on. A long email full of excuses and nostalgia. "I've changed," he said. "You misunderstood me." I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but peace. Because closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the person you become after them. I've changed too. I'm softer now, but stronger. Calmer, but firmer. I know what silence should sound like. Not fear, not tension, just calm breathing and the sound of a woman who owns her own life. Sometimes when I'm people watching in cafes like this, I see women who look how I used to, nervous laugh, shrinking posture, eyes darting for approval. And I want to tell them, you don't have to live small for someone else's comfort. Last week, I met a young couple at a hostel. They asked if I was traveling alone. I said yes. The woman looked at me, surprised. Weren't you scared at first? I smiled, terrified. But then I realized staying scared was worse. That's the truth, isn't it? Control teaches you fear. Freedom teaches you courage. I still take trips. Sometimes long ones, sometimes just an hour's drive. I'll stop at a diner, order pie, talk to strangers. Every time I do, I feel that same spark, the one I saw in my reflection the night I whispered enough. And I think about all those years I spent shrinking myself for someone who called it love. Now I know better. Love never makes you smaller. It expands you. It lets you breathe. I sip my coffee, watching the steam curl into the air, and I realize I'm finally home. Not in a house. In myself. I close my notebook and whisper the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. Years of control broke me, but freedom rebuilt me, stronger than ever. Then I look up, meet my own reflection in the cafe window, and smile. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Write it in the comments.